Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny. I'm here with Keith Baker, and today we're going to talk about your latest works, Frontiers of Eberron, Quickstone. For those of you who don't know this, I'm sure everyone that's read an Eberron book knows this, that Keith Baker is the mastermind that have created the Eberron universe since 3.5 and Dungeons and Dragons. First things first, how are you, sir?
I am doing great. I'm glad to be here. I'm very excited about Frontiers coming out. Can't wait. And that is my cat moving my laptop.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Is this the first time Eberron is exploring the western side of its, well, not the western one, but this setting takes place between Berland. I don't know if
Yeah,
I'm
it's to the west. It absolutely is. And the thing about this book is that most Eberron books cover very large areas. So you go from things like Secrets of Zendrick and Sarlona that are covering entire continents to the Five Nations where it's covering, 5 different countries, or just the base campaign book where it's covering the entire world. And what we wanted to do here was to sort of focus on a smaller area that hasn't really been delved into. And part of the point of this book is it includes an adventure that runs from level 1 to 5. And it also includes lots of options and such. And part of what we wanted is that you could just pick up this book and start a whole new Eberron campaign with the ideas and the story here. And in a sense, a lot of the major adventures that have come out to this point have all focused on Sharn or focused on sort of the same kind of areas. And so we wanted just something that does show here's a completely different sort of space that you can explore in Eberron. It also specifically, and here's my cat causing trouble, deals with it's, as you mentioned, the border between Breland and Droam. And Droam is one of my favorite regions of Eberron. It's a place where creatures traditionally thought of as monsters are working together to build a nation. And it's something that I've always loved, but basically has never particularly, it's never really been delved into in any canon book. So it's something I'm excited to, dig a little deeper into here.
Is this also the first project where you're working with Roll20 so that this adventure could simply be imported in and played as soon as possible?
Well, I haven't written a lot of adventures, so Roll20 has done conversions, at least of Exploring Eberron, and I think maybe Chronicles. But this is the first product I've worked on that really has a significant adventure. And so, yes, with the Roll20 boost, there's 8 maps, there's tokens, there's a lot of material you get from that.
This has tons of options. So I'm looking like 6 new subclasses, 5 new backgrounds, 6 new species, 15 new feats, including dragon marks, 15 new magic items. What can you tell us about all these new options?
So what we were doing here is, as I mentioned, we wanted to focus on a smaller area, and in particular, that area is the sort of contested land that lies between Breland and Droam. And in doing that, part of the inspiration was drawing on the themes of the classic Western. Frontier justice out in the wilds. It's a different sort of space because this isn't a case of Bralish colonialism. It is actually the case that Droam is a nation that is rising in land that Breland has basically ignored. And it's actually the rise of Droam is what's drawing people there and creating opportunity. But nonetheless, you still get a lot of the stories and the elements that come in the classic Western of being far from the cities, far from forces of law, having to sort of solve your own problems and deal with things on a smaller level. So on the one hand, we have that. On the other hand, being close to Droam means that we have people interacting with creatures traditionally thought of as monsters in new ways. And so the book brings all of that together. So, first of all, you have new species based on the interactions with Droam. So, you have rules in the book for playing gargoyles, gnolls, harpies, medusas, wargs, and then we also did a quick pass on the warforged. And then there's also advice on, minotaurs, oni, and all sorts of other kobolds, all sorts of other creatures known in Droam that have already got stats in one place or another. So you have all of those as options, and that's something that was really interesting to develop. And then the next step you have is, again, sort of the Western theme. So one of the biggest things is the wand slinger. And all along, the idea of Eberron was a place where everyday magic, magic was part of everyday life. Part of the thing is that Eberron was created in 3rd edition when you didn't have cantrips. And there was a limit to which you could actually say, my character is just going to use magic, instead of a weapon. With the introduction of cantrips, that's a very valid way, form of fighter, as it were. And so we've done a lot to sort of really embrace the idea of the wand slinger and explore that. You have 2 of the subclasses, the College of Wands Bard and the Nemesis Sorcerer, are both essentially professional wand slinger, specialists. We have a fighting style and a number of options for any martial character, because basically we have a wand slinger background that gets you magic initiates. So sort of anybody can actually pick up a couple cantrips pretty easily in this edition. And then we have feats and items that sort of basically let you. What we wanted to do is to give choice of arcane focus the same sort of weight as choice of weapon. So the idea is that when you see someone using a wand or a staff, that means something. That tells you something about how they're going to fight or what their advantage is. A staff gives you longer range. A rod is good for getting really up close. A orb is, more of a defensive focus. And so, as I said, we've added a lot of options both in background feats and subclasses that are tied to wand slinging and to the wand slinger. And in fact, we've also added a set of rules for arcane duels. So basically the classic showdown. And part of the idea there is that we want that, 2 people facing on the street, one shot, someone goes down, and that's not what standard D&D combat is designed to emulate. The idea of hit points is it reflects dodging, parrying, defending, that it's that whole idea that you don't actually take a lethal blow until your last hit point is gone. Whereas with the idea of the duel, it's you're standing your ground. This is all about speed and skill. You are not dodging. You're not jumping around. So while the wand slinger can just fight normal combat, the duel is more about, speed and courage, and anybody, can go down in a single shot, depending how things fall.
Oh, that's really wonderful. I've always been unimpressed with how Harry Potter does their wand battles, and I always thought that could have been much more, no pun intended, magical. So hearing what you, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say is, what we've done is we've really tried to model that sort of classic, Western trope, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the 2 people facing off, waiting who's going to make the first move. And so our system basically involves a couple of choices, and you're choosing your sort of strategy, your approach to it. And then you have a couple rounds of basically opposed checks. So part of the point is, are you studying your opponent? Are you trying to intimidate them? Are you relying on your speed and fancy wand work with your sleight of hand? And sort of through a series of back and forth sort of opposed checks, you're building up strengths or weaknesses, and then you have a final roll that brings all of the results of that together. And so, like I say, it's that sort of, it also means it doesn't just go off one single roll, which doesn't really, play to the drama of the situation. Instead, you have this sort of build up as you get closer and closer to the final shot. So I'm very happy with how that worked out.
So I noticed you mentioned a lot of different species coming in. You mentioned Medusa, harpies, and
Mhm.
so forth. Is Would you say that this region of the world pretty much it's a place where a lot of maybe creatures that may have trouble fitting in anywhere? This is where they go.
Well, the whole idea is that that's where they went. The concept is that you have the five nations which dominate the center of Breland, and that basically when humanity came to Corvair, it took all the good land and it kicked everybody who was already there out. And the idea of Droam is it's a region that until 10 years ago was considered on the map to be part of Breland. Breland claimed it, but it's essentially a really crappy wasteland. And so they've never actually really settled much there. And instead, that's where you have gotten harpies, medusas, ogres, and things that basically, because of human superstition and fear, were all chased out of the five nations. And so the idea is all of these things have largely been living in sort of isolation in their own subcultures, and that then 10 years ago, the daughters of Sorakel, three powerful hags, came and sort of brought them together and said, let's build something new, all working together with all our various strengths. And so this is the idea of, well, what can you do if you have a harpy working with a Medusa, working with a troll, working with an ogre? All of them using their various unique abilities, towards a greater good.
Hmm.
And so that's something that happened 10 years ago. And the point is, currently, the main nations of Eberron, the Thronehold nations, have refused to accept Droam as a nation. They basically don't believe it's going to last. They still think of these creatures as monsters. And so, because of that, it is still, Droam recognizes itself as a nation, but legally it's still this sort of no man's land. And that is a part of the story you can choose to explore. It also means that basically this is a haven for brigands, deserters, war criminals, or just dissenters. Anyone who basically is wanted in Breland, well, cross the road over into Droam and you're out of reach. And so that, again, creates a lot of opportunity for adventure.
Hmm. And is that what Quickstone is? Is that the name of the town of the area where the?
So the book, how the book is structured, is it's very similar. I really liked the structure of Rising from the Last War, but as I said, it covers the whole world. And so we kind of mirror that structure, but just in a smaller area. So the first chapter of the book is about the theme, the concept. What does it mean to be telling stories on the frontier? What are roles that your character could play? How do the various themes of pulp and noir, which are the sort of underpinning of Eberron, apply here? And what does the Western flavor add on top of that? And so that's a lot of just sort of raw ideas and sort of details about how life is different. And what kind of stories you might be interested in telling. Chapter 2 is a broad gazetteer of the region, and it talks about all the major towns and cities. It talks about landmarks. It talks about sort of prominent people, you might encounter as NPCs. And among other things, this is very much written so that it is designed to be read by players as well as DMs. It's designed to be, it's not chock full of secrets that nobody can know. And in fact, every entry has a section that's basically, here are ways that your character could have a connection to this town, this place, or this person. So all of it, to me, in creating lore, I always want to say, how is this actually useful to you? What can you do with this? Chapter 3 is Quickstone. And Quickstone, as you said, Quickstone is basically the last town, the last Brailish town on the edge of Droam. And so it is a mining town at the very base of the Grey Wall Mountains. And the whole idea is it's the city on the edge that has been, not particularly exciting, but is now becoming more important because of that role of being the last Bralish town. And so it's still a small town, far smaller than Sharn. And so chapter 3 goes into depth about the factions that work in the town, about the businesses in the town. It's very detailed because it's not that big a town, so we can go into a lot of detail. And so the idea is you could base a campaign in Frontier, on the Frontier anywhere. But Quickstone, if you choose to, is a very good starting point, and there's a lot of options and details and characters and NPCs and things you can work with if you do. Chapter 4 then is player options, and we've talked about those somewhat. Chapter 5 is magic items, and we have a lot of different magic items which go from just sort of unique things from the Frontier, things tied to Droam, things tied to Demon Glass, which is a resource that plays an important role, and various other things. And then chapter 5 is monsters, with a lot of unique monsters, including... maybe I'm getting that wrong. Oh, I am getting that wrong. Chapter 5 is magic items. Chapter 6 is monsters. And this goes from everything from just the Tribex, which is a common mountain beast of burden that has been in Eberron for 20 years and never had a stat block. So, the Tribex is your hop on your Tribex and let's ride. All the way up to the Daukir or Alask and the Overlord, the Horned King, so sort of you have this wide range of epic threats all the way down to just simple creatures that live in the region. And then finally, chapter 7 is Heart of Stone. And as I said, that's an adventure that will take characters from 1st level through 5th level. So again, it's the whole sort of scope of if you want to use this as a campaign setting, Quickstone gives you everything you need to start there and go from that. But it also does just describe the entire region and give you lots of ideas, like just if players are passing through from one place to another, lots of interesting ideas of what could draw them out there or what they could find.
One thing I really enjoy about Eberron is that I think it was one of the first settings, high fantasy settings, where it incorporated the ideas of steampunk. When it comes to like the magic tech level, I'm not sure if that's the right term for this. How would you describe this to anyone that's looking into this for the first time? Would you describe this more like oh, this is probably classic Clint Eastwood
Yeah.
Western,
So
or more Wild West?
Eberron overall, we like to say that overall the sort of touchstone is the end of the 19th century. And so we have telegraphs, but we don't have telephones. And that's to say we have speaking stones, so we have the equivalent of a speaking stone. We have the equivalent of the railroad with the lightning rail, but we don't have cars, or any equivalent to personal automobiles. Air travel is something that is new, and it's just sort of getting going. And so that's the general touchstone, is think end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. On the other hand, it is a world of magic, and part of the point is to explore how would a world that had arcane magic as it exists in D&D solve problems we have solved with technology. Their equivalent of the telegraph actually works based off a 3.5 spell called Whispering Wind, that carries a message from one place to another. And it's saying if you had that, if that was a thing you could do, well, build up a network of stations that can travel Whispering Wind. You don't need to send something across a wire because you have a thing that carries a message. Similarly, that's why even though there are ways you can put firearms in Eberron if you want, it's why we're focused on the wand slinger, not on the gunslinger, because wands are Eberron's answer, or Corvair's answer to personal firearms. And so it's definitely designed, as I say, it is that sort of Clint Eastwood vibe here, but it is still a world of magic. It is a world where, you've got gargoyles flying down from the sky, where you have the lightning rail driven by a fire elemental. And so, there's a little bit of that Wild Wild West, sort of thrown into that, is all I'd say.
So I'm curious, what I mean, I don't want to spoil too much about the adventure,
Mhm.
but I'm curious to know like what are the antagonists in
So that's actually, again, I don't want to go too far without to spoil the adventure either. What I will say is the point of the region, if you just look at it, is you start with you have brigands and bandits who basically are outlaws from Breland. You have raiders from Droam because some of the warlords there's basically the Daughters of Sorkel don't want war, but there are some warlords of Droam along the border who don't, who still have issues with the Braylor settlers, and vice versa. And so you have that going on, and then you have powers at work in the region. There is an overlord called Tolkarash, the Horned King, which is a demonic force that has influence in the region and is trying to create vessels to do its will. You have the Dalkir or Lask, the Still Lord or Master of Stone, theoretically the creator of the gargoyles and medusas. And he is an ancient power. It is an ancient power that has influence in the region and that can spawn cults. You have people dealing with the Archfey, like King Greyfinger. And then you also just have basic drives of human greed. And, all the sort of, again, stories that if you look at many of the classic Westerns, that's what drives them. And so in Quickstone, all I'll say is it in Heart of Stone, it's something where it starts off pretty simply dealing with some mundane issues. And as you dig deeper into it, you're going to discover you're working against a much larger and more significant force.
how many pages is this book so far?
265, I think. It's
Wow,
260 at least.
wow. Were there I'm looking at the cover now and it's just gorgeous. So far, all the Eberron books you produced through DM's Guild have been extraordinary when it comes to the artwork.
Mhm.
Um, can you talk a little bit about I guess, the art direction for this book? Did you use the same resources, the
Sure.
same team on the?
Absolutely. I'll say all our covers have been done by Thomas Borden, and he is fantastic. I just love his work, and to me, that's part of what gives our books a very consistent feel. Is because he's done all of them. What you see here on the cover is actually a scene from Heart of Stone. And it's the Badgers, our iconic adventurers, but this is a scene that your players could find themselves in. You'll notice that they are fighting on the back of a fallen Warforged Titan. And so, slight spoiler alert there. And so, part of it here, all along, I'll say one of the consistent things we have are the Badgers, the adventurers you see here. We wanted that sense that you got through the original, like, third edition books, had sort of consistent characters that you would see from book to book. And that was something we wanted to do. So, in all of our books, you see this group of 5 adventurers. And so that, you get them here. And in this book, it's also the case that this has taken a long time to write. I was working on this in 2021 and it got put on hold. But over the last couple of years, I have been running a campaign set in Quickstone for my Patreon supporters. And over the course of that, there are 10 player characters that people would play. And those characters also are pictured in the book. And so there's a number of scenes. There's a 2-page spread between chapter 6 and 7 that is a scene in the Crown, the main tavern of Quickstone, where actually what you see is the Badgers interacting with the adventurers from the Quickstone campaign. And all along, I mean, I'd say other themes, we are always looking for a sense of sort of the action and excitement of the story. So you see there's a scene of them struggling to climb up a cliff. There's a scene of Gentle and Rev trying to catch a lightning rail, and again, I'm like, that's just a classic scene I could imagine happening. And so, generally the art, we've always sort of wanted it to be something that gives you ideas, that makes you think, I could imagine that scene in my game.
What is it you think is it about the Wild West I don't know if trope is the right word, or just the
Mhm.
themes in general of the Wild West
Right.
that really calls to people.
So there's a bunch of things, and it's, again, we've got a lot of. I could pull up the page in chapter one that talks specifically about a lot of these things, but part of it is that independence is a factor. You're away from when you're in Sharn. There is the Sharn Watch. There is the King's Citadel. There are all these powerful forces that, at the end of the day, are maintaining order. And out on the frontier, you have more of that element. We've always said Eberron is a place that needs heroes, and here that's true more than ever. More often than not, you're in a place where if there's trouble, there isn't anyone else to handle it. One of the things we actually suggest as the possibility of a player role, if you are planning a campaign, not just passing through, is to say your character could be the sheriff. You could be, your cleric could be the preacher and basically take a stake in the town. You're not just passing through, you're not just a random investigator, you are the sheriff. And if trouble comes to town, you got to figure out how to deal with it. And so to me, as I said, it's that combination of this is on your shoulders, but then also that idea of opportunity, that this is a place where things are changing and things are happening. And the whole idea, again, of the campaign is it's a chance for the town to prosper or fail based on your actions. And that goes with that idea of play the preacher, play the sheriff, because, the town is another character that you're trying to take care of, essentially.
But by any chance, is this tied into any way to your other recent books for Eberron, the Chronicles of Eberron or Exploring Eberron?
Well, Chronicles and Exploring are both general. They don't really have a specific setting. They talk about a lot of different things. And so Exploring Eberron does have a section on Droam. And this basically just takes that and goes deeper. So yes, that's the section Exploring is the deepest section we've had on Droam up till this point. This just takes that and builds on it. And beyond that, I don't think Chronicles in particular ties, but there's a lot of things in Chronicles like the Session Zero discussion, and things like that that definitely apply. But again, the point of Chronicles and Exploring is that they're not sort of focused books. And here we were saying, let's make a book that really focuses on a particular region.
Hmm. So you mentioned that this was on. You've been working on this for years. Are there
Mhm.
was there any other possible other Eberron books you maybe possibly be tied into this in the future in some way? Maybe a possible adventure book. Was that
I
too early
honestly
to say?
don't know what I'm doing with Eberron in the future. I had previously said that this was going to be my last Eberron book on the DM's Guild, just because there's a lot of limitations on what I can do. I can't write a novel, I can't make a card game, all things that I like. So what I've said is that I'm considering creating a new setting just because I want a setting where I could explore all those options, where I could do more than I can do with Eberron. At the very least, I will always be continuing to support Eberron on my Patreon, which is Keith Baker, and on my blog. And I have, a few ideas for things I could do as an Eberron book, but at the moment, I don't have immediate plans for something coming next. And however, part of the point is that anybody can write um, content for Eberron on the DM's Guild. I love it if some members of the community decide to create a series of adventures or stories, if they build on what we've done here with Quickstone. So, yeah, fingers crossed.
If I may sidestep away from Frontiers just for a second,
Mhm.
you also created a card game recently. Am I correct?
I think you're actually thinking it's more of a dice game. You may be thinking of Glim. And so we made a game called Glim that came out on Kickstarter recently. That is a game that we at Together Studios designed, but it's being produced by Greg Hale, the producer of the Blair Witch Project. And I don't actually know. I know it's at the printer, but I don't actually know sort of the big long plan. But that's something we had a lot of fun with, and that is basically much like our card game Illimat. It's something where we wanted to make a game that felt a little bit like an artifact from a fantasy world. And so it's a dice game where you're sort of vying for control of sources of influence in this magical world. And it has sort of aspects, it's part dice game and then has aspects of a sort of light deck builder. Basically, through each round of play, you are claiming cards, and then those cards you can use in the next round of play. After 3 rounds, it's all about how many victory points have you gotten. But I really love it. It's something, it's easier to sort of explain when you see it than to just explain in a high concept. But it's fast, it's fun, and yet the more you play, the deeper the strategies get. So keep an eye out for that. It is called Glim, Glim.
Getting back to Frontiers real fast, is there a favorite portion of the book, something about the book that really like, wow, I'm really glad I made this. I'm so excited about this.
There's a bunch of things actually we haven't mentioned that just sort of slipped through the cracks. So I will say, I mentioned the wand slinging subclasses, but we have 6 subclasses, and those are just 2. So, you have the Demon Glass Barbarian, you have the Commerce Cleric, which ties to the fact that the 3 Faces of Coin, which is a sort of secretive religion, it has a stronghold in Quickstone. You have the Bloodhound Ranger, which is very much that sort of bounty hunter, on your trail, always gets their prey class. And then the Stone Sovereign is a warlock that ties to Orlosk, to King Greyfinger, to the sort of themes of stone that you find in this book. So those are all fun. But one of the biggest things that's kind of exciting is because we knew this book was going to come out after the 2024 rules, we made sure first to make sure that all our mechanics were up to date with the 2024 rules. And in particular, we decided that just to make sure that people can play an Eberron campaign right off the bat, day one, you can pick this up and go. We included a variation on Warforged with the 2024 rules in mind, but we also included rules for Dragon Marks. The Dragon Mark rules as presented in Rising from the Last War don't really work anymore, especially by the time we get to 2024. They've just slowly gotten more and more out of date. And so we've included a basic set. It doesn't get into Greater Dragon Marks or Cerberus Marks, but it is a basic set using backgrounds and feats that lets you start right away playing a Dragon Mark character. And that's something I think people will be very excited about and have a lot of fun with. Beyond that, again, I do love the whole book. I really do love what we've done with Wand Slingers. I really feel like Wand Slinging has a lot of flavor, but that basically it's sort of what you said before. Spellcasting doesn't have a lot of flavor. Again, it doesn't actually make a difference whether you use a staff or a wand. You might as well not even, have them. It's just you need one of them to cast. And all along I wanted that idea that, like I said, you've got the wand slinger with their brace of different wands, and then you've got the guy sitting on the back of the wagon with the staff over his leg, that, you have tools that serve different purposes and styles of combat. And so to me, that just adds a lot more flavor that really fits the idea of magic being a part of everyday life in Eberron.
This is our 3rd interview, perhaps, or 4th.
Yeah.
And every work we talked about, and I think I mentioned this to you before our interview started, I tend to be overwhelmed in a good way of the amount of material the book has for lore, a player option, and so forth. It's amazing. And these 3 books, I'm talking also about Chronicles and Exploring Eberron. They're all immense materials. If I may ask, where do you go for inspiration for creativities? Is there like just certain music you zone out to? Do you take nature walks?
I certainly walk every day. There's music that I like. I'll say for Quickstone, I actually think I posted a playlist for my patrons. I don't remember. For Quickstone, I've been listening to just mixed up the soundtrack to 1883, to Godless, and to Westworld. There's a lot of good stuff there. Other than that, it's sort of just, yeah, filled with ideas. And certainly watching things, Godless and 1883 are both really good Westerns I enjoyed, so I certainly recommend both of those. I'm sure there are books I should come up with, but mine's a blank right now. Sorry, I don't have a magic perfect answer that will unlock all the hidden secrets in our minds, but
Before we wrap up, so this is right now on DM's Guild as a pre-order. I assume they'll eventually in the fall or winter of 2024 you could get the PDF, you could get there'll be printed options.
It's coming out on the 17th. So it's going to be available on September 17th in PDF, and we hope, we've got a check. We're still waiting to make sure the proofs come through, but it should be available on the 17th, both print on demand and PDF. So only through the DMs Guild, but yeah, next week it should happen.
Excellent! Wow, that's exciting. I better look. I get paid soon.
Yeah.
One last question then, and you don't have to answer this. If this is your last, let's say this is your last. I hope not.
Mhm.
Let's say this is your last work for Eberron.
Yep.
This the end of you leaving the world behind. When people look at Eberron years from now, and they start exploring some of the creativity and themes behind it, what messages do you hope they get? If students look at your work 20, 30
Mhm.
years from now, what do you hope that they learn?
Oh, it's an interesting question. First of all, as I say, I'm not just going to suddenly stop supporting Eberron altogether. At the very least, I'll be continuing to support it on my Patreon and my blog. So I don't want people thinking like, oh, tomorrow there's no more Eberron. And while I've said this is the last book, it's the last book for now. I have ideas. There's nothing saying next year I won't suddenly come up with a thing I really want to write and do it. So I don't want people to worry that this is somehow the end of Eberron, because that's not the case at all. It's just that there are other things I'm going to explore for at least a little while. Looking to the future, the main thing to me with Eberron is I think you see some of it already. One of the things Jeremy Crawford said at Gen Con in a panel that was a 20-year retrospective is that already over the last 20 years, some of the things that were unique about Eberron have actually just become standard parts of D&D. One of the simplest is just the fact that orcs and goblins aren't always evil. That the idea of Eberron was to have us sort of take all the sort of tropes and things that have become very standardized and say, but what if you looked at those in a different way? What if gnomes, instead of being comic relief, were actually ruthless assassins? What if orcs, instead of being always evil, potentially were the first druids and the last defense against the demon wastes? And it just basically, to me, the second big point in Eberron was also always come first with the idea that the setting is supposed to be a source of inspiration and that it's something that should give people a place to start, but people can always change it. To me, the biggest example of this is that in 20 years, we have never committed to the cause of the morning, because the whole point of the morning is to give you something that can be unique in your game. And there's lots of possibilities, but we don't want to just tell you what did it. We want you to discover what did it. To me, the best, most interesting campaigns, are homebrew, when people create their own entirely own stories, but people don't necessarily have time. to make a whole world. And what we wanted to do with Eberron from the start is say, take this, use as much as you want, but also make it your own. Add your details. You decide what caused the mourning. You decide what happens with the mark of death. And so I hope that's a thing people will enjoy going forward in the future. You know, that as I say, it's already elements of it we see in mainstream D&D. And beyond that, like I said, just that idea of create things that are designed to inspire people, not just to tell them how to tell their stories.
Thank you so much for your time, Keith. Is there any last words? Anything you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I really hope people enjoy Frontiers of Eberron. I've had a great time making it. I should very much give a shout out to Imogen Gingell, who is the Imogen designed the Adventure Heart of Stone, and she also developed most of the mechanics in the book with the subclasses and the monsters and such. I've developed the story, and Imogen figured out how to bring them all to life. And so, again, I have worked with Imogen on Exploring and Chronicles, and it is she's brilliant. She currently, I think, is working on the Cosmere RPG with Brotherwise Games. But anyhow, shout out to Imogen.
Again, thank you, Keith. And I will put a link in the description for anyone who wants to check out this book right away. And to our viewers, thank you for watching or thank you for listening. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.